He holds a master's in public administration degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill School of Government, and a bachelor's degree of science from North Carolina State University. So he's got this internal conflict going here with these two universities, which will make his presentation even that much more exciting. Next, we have Scott Eller. Scott is the founder and CEO of the Community Assisted and Supported Living, Inc., otherwise known as CASTLE. It's a nonprofit affordable housing provider targeted to the vulnerable population, often diagnosed with severe and persistent mental illness. CASTLE helps these individuals with developmental disabilities, many who are unhoused, to thrive when given stable housing and supportive services. In partnership with Blue Skies Community, who is an affordable housing developer, CASTLE has developed 5 multifamily communities in 5 counties, with 4 that are currently breaking ground in the next and will come to fruition in the next year. Scott has shepherded CASTLE to grow to over 1,000 residential units in Alachua, Orange, Polk, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota, Charlotte, Lee, and Collier counties. So at this point, I'm going to turn over to Matt, who's going to lead off the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt, and I'm very glad to be here today as a partner with Scott on this effort. This has been a long partnership in coming, and we're not done yet, and I think you'll see that through the presentation today. We've got a couple places at the end for some good hot topics, because affordable housing is just that in Florida. I think everybody in this room has experienced it in their community to some degree, and I think as you see here, we're just trying to share some insights and perspectives, most importantly, lessons learned from both of our perspectives about what might actually work in your communities as well. So we greatly appreciate the opportunity to share the insights. Here's our lovely faces. So we'll move right on to that and talk about the challenge, right? We've all talked about the barriers that exist for affordable housing. Some are talking about that it's a critical challenge. We've even heard that it's becoming a crisis in Florida and in many of our communities here. Now, when we look at this bullet list, I'm not going to go through every single one, but I am going to touch upon a couple of them. And if you even look at the bottom one, right, the sentiments of NIMBYism, we know this. There's different acronyms for this topic. It's not even just about affordable housing anymore, right? We found in many communities just the concept of multifamily development, period. Moving away from that single-family retiree model has become a challenge in many communities. That just changes the landscape entirely. I was very curious, just at a question out of the gates, is any one of these topics in your community like the hottest button? Like, can somebody just say, what's the biggest one in your community that you're facing? Anybody? Nobody? Lack of inventory. Great, because that actually relates to what we're going to be talking about today. What's another what's in your community?
Lack of missing middle housing.
The missing middle. All right. Fantastic. Yes? Anti-multifamily. Yeah. Have you heard, of course, about the Live Local Act that just passed? All right, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. What else? Yes?
Insurance rates.
Insurance rates, yes. All right. The actual workforce housing. Right, so the numerous barriers that exist, and this list could be multiplied by 10, and I'm sure we wouldn't capture them all. And I think the reason why we want to throw this list up at the very beginning was to make sure that we're all recognizing that we're not just trying to solve one problem. These are many, many problems coming together to one complex situation that we're all facing. Of course, here at the FCC May conference, one of the things that we're always trying to do is recruit the best and the brightest out there, and now this particular issue is not just something that affects that part of the population, right? It affects all generations, from the young to the old, and of course it's having significant workforce problems in each one of our local governments. And as we try and recruit folks either from neighboring communities or out of state, I can tell you that when I do the interviews in our organization, one of those questions at the end of the interview process is always, how's your housing situation? And of course, you have to be honest about it, otherwise they might be living 2 or 3 counties away from you, right? So this is very important as far as how we recruit those best and the brightest. Now, for this conversation, it is important that we set the tone with what affordability means. I heard workforce earlier, you hear affordable. There's all different terms that create this umbrella of what affordable. For today's purposes, I'm going to define it as this. It means using less than 30% of a household monthly income on housing cost. Right? You'll see later, if it's more than that, you're going to be cost burdened. And we use a metric called area median income, so AMI, and you see the methodology right here. It's produced from some numbers that come out of HUD, and we use categories like it's 60, 80, 100, and 120%. And I'm going to show you a table in a moment that gives you a good reference point as to what that means in Sarasota County, and that'll relate exactly to what Scott's going to be focusing on later, because he's certainly not immediately jumping to the 100 and 120%, right? So he's going to be looking at 80% and below for the models that they use. And of course, from that, we can actually calculate some monthly rents. Now, I don't expect everybody to look at this eye test and see every single thing on here. We do AMIs based on household sizes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The common one that we use is 100% AMI for a household of 4 is $22.60 for a monthly rent, right? $22.60 at 100% AMI. So just, it's not to say it's good or bad, it's just to give you a reference point. So if somebody says 80%, that's $1,700 of rent in our community. If somebody says 60%, it's at $1,200, around $1,300. We already had a pre-look at 2023, and as you can expect, the numbers went this way again. So when somebody's talking about affordable housing, it's very important to pay attention to the AMI percent. The new Live Local Act, which we'll talk about in a little bit, goes all the way up to 120%. I think some at this dais might actually say that that might not be entirely affordable housing, right? So you want to encourage that mix, that diversification of the AMI. See projects come forward with the 60, the 80, and the 100 all mixed in. All right, this is what I was referencing earlier. These are just some more kind of facts to help set the tone for the conversation today. It's really understand what's in your community before you start taking action to solve that problem. And in Sarasota County, we're talking about 30% of our households are cost burdened. Again, they're spending more than that 30% of their monthly incomes just on housing costs. And of those households that are renter occupied, more than 53% are cost burdened. So again, going to the renters of our communities are having those particular issues. The greatest number here you see, our cost burden renters are within the lowest income categories, 94% with incomes less than $35,000. And since 2015, renters with incomes between 35 and 75 have become increasingly cost burdened, and of course, everybody's very aware of that last bullet. The rents in just about everybody's communities across the state of Florida are going up astronomically. We have many employees in Sarasota County that have just told us stories about, hey, my landlord just raised the rent last month by X%, and so it's living out in all of our lives. So this, of course, is the most important lesson of our day, and we're going to start to talk about the toolbox that's referenced in the agenda for today. There's no one solution. There's no one magic bullet. Everybody's community has unique circumstances, different neighborhoods, different dynamics at play, and there behooves all of us to be able to create a suite of creative strategies as we try and not just encourage but incentivize affordable housing. And one of the biggest lessons we learned in this case study that we're going to spend a lot of time today on is how we can partner with other organizations on how we go about doing that. It's very easy sometimes for a local government to just change a rule or a regulation and say, hey, we did something to affect or encourage affordable housing. Well, did it actually do anything or not? And it's very hard to gauge that, but when you're in a partnership and we're actually living and breathing a project together, from soup to nuts, and actually look forward to, of course, the ribbon cutting, that's that moment where we can actually feel like we did things together. Now, before we moved, it was really important that we understood the situation in our community and set the foundation for how we move forward. In 2017, our county commission established to be a priority, and even till today, we have it as part of our strategic plan. And probably the biggest thing was conducting a situational report back in 2017, and really grateful for a team of staff that got together and actually led this effort. So this one was done internally, and you can see that we reached out through online surveys, subject matter experts, individual conversations, and came up with our situational report with 18 recommendations, things that we've learned from the people that are in the business of affordable housing about how we can advance affordable housing. And we inventory them by inventory, governance, economy, assistance, and engagement. And you can check out this report on our website. It's scgov.net/affordable housing, and it's got some really great recommendations that I think could be applicable to any community. We also had the Florida Housing Coalition come work with us and the city of Sarasota to also do a coalition action plan on affordable housing, and had 12 specific recommendations. And from that, we were able to take that menu, that suite of options, and bring it to our policymakers and say, okay, now that we know what the affordable housing experts are saying, what would you like to advance? Now, every community is going to have their toolbox. This is an example of what's in our toolbox. And I'm not going to go through every single one here, right? There's so many things that could be on the bullet list here. But I do want to touch upon a couple that I think people overlook. And I'm going to start with the very first bullet on here, expedited processing, right? Affordable housing comes through a local government. The first thing we're supposed to all do is expedite through the process. And if you're not careful, what you end up doing is just expediting roadblocks to them. Right? You ask all of your reviewers, hey, can you make sure this is on the top of your list? And what happens? They give you guys, 20 comments. Well, that's not expediting something. That's really not. In fact, that's just showing how fast you can throw up a roadblock. And so what we've tried to establish is a culture of really saying, hey, as you develop these, let's figure out what those solutions are. Let's have meetings, let's have interventions, let's have those moments where we can really help make sure that if they do have comments back on their application, we're tidying those all up so the time it comes back in, we're getting that thing advanced through the process. So seeing something through completion rather than just getting somebody comments as quickly as possible is very important. We also just reduced our impact fees. I'm sure you all are probably very aware, but the Florida statutes do allow you to lower or reduce certain impact fees. We did it based on a tiered system of that AMI. So if you come in with 60% units, you actually can have lower impact fees, come up with 80, a little bit this tiered all the way through, so you actually pay less on the impact fee tier side. I'm going to come back to the targeted funding because it actually relates to the project that we worked on. And the other one that I want to touch on here, of course, is half-dwelling units. And I'm going to talk about that in just one moment. But the first thing that I'm really excited to talk about is the concept of having an affordable housing strategist on staff. It was an idea that came about from both of those situational reports and the Florida Housing Coalition Action Plan. And if you think about it in this term, you're in a planning department, plan development services department, we have a lot of planners, we have a lot of engineers, we have a lot of zoning experts, we have all those things, and they're very good at understanding the comprehensive plan. They're very good at understanding regulations. They're not necessarily, though, the advocate for affordable housing. So who is there when somebody knocks on the door and says, hey, I've got an affordable housing development and I want to work with your community on how to do that? This is a person they can go to who's in an advocacy position, a neutral position on the regulations, and can work through these bullet items on your screen right here. So it works with the affordable housing developers, seeking those creative solutions. And if there are things that are policies, programs, procedures that might be roadblocks or barriers, what ideas can this person come up with working with whoever that person that just came in the door and help bring forth some policy decisions for consideration about how we can improve the process? But they can also be that person who expedites proposals that I was referencing a moment ago. Who's that person walking around at the desk and saying, hey, what's going on with that project right there? How can I help? How can I work through a solution on that piece? They can serve as a liaison to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. I'm sure many communities already have that. If you receive SHIP funding from the state, you have to have that, and great ideas come from that advisory committee, and of course, monitoring development proposals. So again, I highly encourage something like this in your community. It's been very helpful. Unfortunately, we just had it come vacant, and all of a sudden, you can absolutely feel that loss in like 2 days, just not having that person on your staff. So we're actively recruiting this one back into our shop as soon as possible. This is the other one that I want to talk about before we go into the case study. Now, there's a difference here. This one's not particularly about affordable housing per se. It's about increasing housing diversification, right? And in Sarasota County, that's a really big deal. Forever we did the single family model for many, many, many years. And so when the first multifamily came about a couple years ago, it was a really big deal. We've actually had quite a bit of a wave of multifamily over the last couple years. And to encourage that was this concept of a half dwelling unit. And I'm just going to simply read the italicized text here because it speaks very clearly. So it's a multifamily dwelling unit that is no greater than 750 square feet of habitable space. It's located within our urban area, not on a barrier island, and not used as transient accommodation, i.e. a short-term rental, something like that. It shall be counted as 1/2 unit for density purposes only. So it's pretty similar to a density bonus. So if somebody's coming in for 100 units, right, they technically can do 200 units so long as it meets this criteria here. And what we did was we used multiple tools in our toolbox to make it more encouraging to use this tool. So if you're 750 square feet or less, yeah, you get counted as an HDU, half dwelling unit, but you also get to have reduced parking requirements. You also can have commercial redevelopment flexibility, which is basically the work, live at the same time in your same building. You get the reduced impact impact fees, and you get reduced utility fees. This model has only been approved since 2019. We've had one that came through our rezoning process and now is actually in site development and building permitting. We expect to take a tour of the building here in the next coming month, and I'm sure they're going to go like hotcakes, just like any multifamily in Sarasota County. We've got several others that have been also approved through our land use entitlement process, and so you see the bottom. We're going to monitor what those rental rates are for the first year, what those might look like in 5 years, and so forth, and that'll inform how we move forward with policy decisions around the half dwelling unit model. And that gets us to our case study, and I'm right on top. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to set the stage for Scott, and he's going to come up in a couple minutes. This really focuses on utilizing surplus lands. I'm sure we're all familiar with that concept. And the standard answer when somebody comes forward and says, do you have any surplus lands, often is not so much, we already have a use for that property or that property. And so as we advance through this, I think we're all going to have a better understanding of what Sarasota County at least did that might be applicable in your community about how to go about taking a look at unlocking the potential of these surplus lands. Now, it is a requirement, right? We do have a requirement that every 3 years, local governments are supposed to take an inventory of their lands and say, hey, what could be surplus, particularly, and then utilized for affordable housing. And if you didn't pay attention to this year's Live Local Act, it's actually going to be this October that you have to do it. So now's a perfect time to pay attention to this concept. So those Florida statutes lay the groundwork, but it was our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee a couple years ago that really made a strong effort to our county commission and said, we do believe that you have some surplus lands that might be really good fits for affordable housing in your community. Now, of course, the question then became, well, how do we go about identifying those lands, right? This system, this Florida statute's been there for many, many years, and it hadn't yielded any fruit in the past. So the first thing that we did was ask some pros. We went out and actually got Colliers to come on board, and a third-party analysis took a look at all of our kind of, we'll say, reasonably suited lands that might be good fits. So it wasn't every property in Sarasota County, but reasonably suited properties. And they did what's called a comprehensive strategic plan for affordable housing in Sarasota County. And again, if you're interested in this report, it is on our affordable housing website. Grab it down, take a look, and see their methodology. A couple things that they looked at, you can see the size, zoning, hospitals, schools, mass transit, drugstores, groceries, a lot of those things you might not think of right off the bat. Kind of just look for what's vacant land and what's got the right zoning. This took it to another level. They also did a SWOT analysis, which was very helpful. As an example, we had one property that was a great site for affordable housing, but it was in a food desert, right? So there was no grocery, there was no pharmacy nearby, so it made it to the bottom of the list. Now, as we talked about what was the best suited site, that's where we come into a partnership with Blue Sky Communities in Castle. And it had to do with this property here. It's actually located in the city of Sarasota. It's called 4644 North Tamiami Trail. Now it's called New Trail Plaza. I just seem to call it 4644. Just easier for me to call it that way. Interesting history of this parcel. We actually acquired this parcel for it to become a park. And you can see off to the right, there's a little forest over there. It was actually connected to a park called North Water Tower Park in that community. And so it was an interesting policy decision. Here's something that was slated and scheduled and planned to be a local community park, yet now it's the #1 thing in this report to be an affordable housing development location. And of course, our commission said, yes, let's move forward with affordable housing, showing that political will to really advance affordable housing in our community. The other two sites, we have one that's actually about 114 acres and another one that's about 24 acres. And all three sites that were identified in the top of that report now are either under contract or are in negotiations for a contract. So even though we're just going to focus on one today, it's really a very big effort in Sarasota County as we have, again, 3 contracts going on at the same time for 3 different affordable housing locations. So the next question we had to ponder was, well, how do we go about finding somebody like Castle and Blue Sky out there that would be our inevitable partner on this? And we used a process called invitation to negotiate, very similar to an RFP or something like that. But the ITN actually provided us a whole lot more flexibility, which was necessary and beneficial in this case. It was much more flexible. It still was competitive. It was still sealed bids and so forth. And then the proposals would then go to the board, and the board could ultimately say, yes, go negotiate with that one. Hey, go negotiate with both, or even just, no, thank you, we don't like those proposals at all, and then we could reevaluate that time. Now, we did put it out for nonprofit organizations to begin with. And that was something that was one of those moments in time where we probably realized we narrowed the scope too much. And so that really helps us kind of go down a path of when you go down this effort and try and do an ITN or request for proposals, determine what's really important, because the more bullets you add on the screen, the more you're taking it down to a much more limited scope of people that are actually going to put their name on their hat to be your partner. Now, again, we originally thought it was supposed to be a nonprofit organization, but a lot of nonprofits also have secondary arms, relationships with other organizations that are for-profit, and that was actually where we fell on the first sword, if you will. But you can see here, these are still really important to us. The number of units in the AMI, length of time for affordable housing. That was a decision that we had to really ponder and think hard about. Is this something that we just want to have affordable for 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? What is that model that's out there? How hard is it actually going to be to change the zoning? Is it a site that's ready, fit for zoning, or do we have to go through a rezone process? Do we want to offer this as a no cost, or do we want to have a purchase price? A lot of times these parcels actually were acquired with certain pots of money that come from voter referendums and so forth, and so we do need to pay back those dollars, and in this case that is the outcome that we did, so we did have a purchase price for this one. One of the most interesting pieces, of course, and I think that's going to be highlighted later today, is of course the qualifications and experience of the potential purchasers. It's been a real honor and privilege to be working with Castle and Blue Sky on this. It's hard during the negotiations. I'm sure you might have a comment about that, because, but we made it, right? We got there, and now we have a very productive relationship on it. But the best part about that process is to really see the products that they've done in the past. And I think when Scott's bio was read earlier, your bio just speaks volumes about the success you've had in the past, and that really gave us confidence in moving forward. But again, originally our scope was too narrow. And so therefore, our third-party consultant said, hey, go ahead and put it out for for-profits as well. See what happens, kind of thing. So we tried again. We had more options. We got 6 proposals. So that was great. So second time at it, we had 6 proposals. Our county commission gave us a little bit more policy guidance, which was helpful. In fact, they said increase the number of units, increase the purchase price, which didn't make everybody happy. A big key decision, focus on 80% or less. That was very important policy guidance for us, right? Are we talking about 100% or 120%? I shared those numbers with you earlier. Are we going to talk about true more workforce housing, 80% or less? And there was some couple real estate function things like a sizable down payment to make sure that we were truly in partnership together. Now, one of the more interesting pieces about this was the board did provide guidance to negotiate with Blue Sky Communities and Castles, but that was only as a second option. It was an interesting conversation. I remember it very vividly. Our board actually gave guidance to go forward with their first option, but they said, hey, and very astutely so, what if it doesn't work out right there? Let's go ahead and give the county administrator options A, B, and C at the same time, and that allowed us to negotiate with 3 parties at one time. And that worked out very well, of course, because the first choice didn't work out again. I don't need to go through all the details about what didn't work out, but it was very good, of course, for Blue Sky and Castle. Now, interestingly enough, it is a competitive process, and after pulling out, that first choice actually tried to come back in. And before you know it, we had 3 organizations that came to the board with the exact same deal, if you will. You can see right there in the middle of the screen, the purchase price was $1.9 million, sizable deposit, and they all were able to meet the number of units at the 80% AMI or less. And of course, at that meeting, based on all those factors we've talked about, and I still think one of the biggest things was your success rate in the past and how you approached the matter, the board ultimately told us to go forward and move forward with Blue Sky Communities and Castle. So the next big step was agree to terms, right? This is what I was referencing earlier. Not the easiest thing because you're here entering into a partnership, but at the same time, this is county land. It's surplus land, and we want to make sure we're looking out for the best interests of the community at the same time. And so we had to ask ourselves, what was really the most important thing to the county? Because, again, the more restrictions we put into that contract, the more these guys were going to have a hard time with it. And I'm sure you're going to talk a little bit about some of those things that are more important, particularly on something called on the screen the land use restriction agreement. But we wanted to make sure we had something that met our expectations. So, yeah, we wanted the development concept plan. We also did want to have conversations about the land use restriction agreement. We're actually still in conversations about that, but I think we're on terms about it, and we understand how it's going to work, and that's going to wrap into something that Scott's going to talk about in a little bit. And for this affordability period, just as a note, it was a 50-year affordability period. Another thing for Sarasota County to be comfortable moving forward with was really understanding the financing to make sure that the property just didn't transpire, and then obviously the affordable housing never really manifest on that site. They were able to show us that we were going to apply for 9% housing credits, and they're going to speak to that in just a minute, and how successful they were. And at the same time, they needed a local contribution, and so we were able to work that through our Office of Housing and Community Development through the State Housing Initiatives Partnership Program. Again, using another tool in the toolbox, in this case, money, to be able to help their application move forward. Now, this last, we'll call it lesson learned before I pass it over to Scott, is adapt. I think that's been our biggest lesson learned through the whole process, is every single corner kind of was a new twist. And this is still a new thing. This is the first time we've done an affordable housing development on Sarasota County land. And so it was constantly new information coming at us. And along the way, a lot of financial information became the heart of the matter. They were applying for tax credits, and at the same time, Sarasota County had the American Rescue Plan Act, otherwise known as ARPA, come forward. And our board allocated $25 million for the creation of affordable housing. Now, this happened after 4644 deal. So, of course, for the county, we were not looking at Blue Sky Castle as one of the recipients of it. But, of course, they said, well, if it's available, obviously, can we put our name in the hat, too? Now, just as note, Sarasota County's allocation for affordable housing amounts to the second highest from a local government in Florida and the single largest allocation of funds towards affordable housing in the county's history. And what's really neat about this situation is a coalition of local housing and philanthropic organizations came forward and identified the projects themselves for that $25 million. And of course, Blue Sky Castle was on that list, and that was really great of you all to be able to do, was really organize with the other local nonprofits and come forward as a team. And that accounted for 8 projects in our community with over 741 affordable housing units. And so moving forward, Blue Sky Castle was successful in receiving $4.2 million of that funding. And I'm sure everybody can recognize that's significant gap funding for them. And with that, it's time for a different perspective. So I'm going to give it over to Scott, and then we'll move forward with some questions after that.
Okay, so we talk about the ITN process here, and there's some tricks to this. As he said, we were not the first awardee, but fortunately, Matt was given the directive to keep on negotiating with other groups. So while he was trying to move the other deal forward, and when he couldn't, at least we were right there and was already in the works, so it was able to move it along a lot quicker than otherwise. And while this was going on, we came up with the American Rescue Plan Act. And thank goodness we did, because as we all know right now, construction costs are up. The $4.2 million, especially, with the challenge that we have to do 96 units, really made a lot of sense. With the funding you get through tax credits, it's enough pretty much to do around 80 units. In some cases, 72 units. It depends on the area location. So the American Rescue Plan funding helped us get to that gap to get to the full 96 units. The challenges we had is it sort of caused a lag in timing on having to negotiate with it, and I'll tell you what it is. There's timing that's involved on permitting, on getting your contracts, and also when the tax credit applications are let. And getting all those to match up is easier said than done. And the ARPA money in this particular case gave Blue Castle a boost in the cycle, because we went into the application for 9% credits. Does everybody know what tax credits are? Okay. So we know that there's 4% credits and 9%. And going into the round, we had the LGAO from the county, from the Office of Housing and Community Development. We had the $4.2 million. And that got us to the point to where we were very competitive, because we had more units per proposal than anybody else, and we had more match. And the 9% credits, as we all know, are extraordinarily competitive. Something that you're probably going to face if you're doing this in your area is you get a developer like us, and we're going to say that we're going to apply for tax credits. Well, here's the reality. In 9% credits, it's not uncommon not to win your first application. You typically have to go in for a second and third application. So something that you think could be coming out of the ground in a year could actually be 2 years or 3 years in some cases. So this is really playing the long game, especially with the developer you choose. And the other thing that you're going to want to do is, and Matt pointed to it beautifully, you want to get somebody that plays the long game and that's got a lot of experience in this and has a record of winning the applications with Florida Housing Finance Corporation. The challenge we had, and it was really a Hail Mary on winning the deal, the county has until December 31, 25 to get the money expended, to get the reporting ready, to then submit it to the feds in 26. So what would have happened if we did not win that first application? Well, then we would apply again in 6 months, okay, and then go through the process again. Well, then it causes a lot of banks with the county because they're on a timeline for their funding. So a fallback in this particular case could have been going to a 4% credit. But on 4% tax credits, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but we have to come up with about 25-30% of the funding. So what that means is we now are using that 4.2% required in that deal, but as a consequence, we're not going to get 96 units. We would have gotten probably 72 to 80 units. So winning that first application on a one-shot deal was nothing short of miraculous. Something that's really interesting about the relationship between Blue Sky and Castle, we're a not-for-profit and they're a for-profit. We're in the ownership structure at 51%, the for-profit's in at 49%. So that's one area of protection because it's mission-driven. We are scrutinized by the IRS as to that we have to follow our mission by our organizations, by its mission statement. So it adds longevity and guarantees it in addition to the land use restriction agreement, which is also a crucial piece to this. But what really gave this one some oomph was this. While Castle for 24 years now has been doing real estate development and qualifies and has the experience, Blue Sky has a wealth of experience and they have an amazing team of people that are very successful on tax credit applications. To date, Blue Sky is about 10 and a half years in operation, and they have over 20 developments in service right now, and they have 5 that they're working on to bring out of the ground. So they have a very successful track record. That gives it strength, but what gives it strength on the Castle side on these applications is we are extraordinarily strong in services. And what I mean by that is when Florida Housing finances these deals, they want to make sure that there's longevity in the deal and we're going to be a good neighbor. So it's not only developing a beautiful building, but it's developing it and having what I call social infrastructure into the deal. So like for our homeless development we did in Sarasota County, we opened that March 18th of 20. What else happened in March of 20? Okay. But because we were involved with Blue Sky and we had the resources that we have with our case managers and outreach, we filled the building in 43 days. By April 30th, it was full. We were the first tax credit development for homeless disabling on this particular example to fill. And to fast forward to right now, we are now in 2023, and we are 90+% of the people we moved in on day one are still there. And the reason is because we have supportive housing team. We have case managers, people help them do supportive housing, transportation, food pantry, clothing. We have case managers that help them get benefits or help them get jobs. All these things are crucial. And so when we go into each development, even though the one we're talking about today is not going to be a development for people with homeless, disabling conditions, it's going to be for workforce. So what are the challenges going to be there? We're going to have challenges as far as helping people with financial literacy, how to balance their checkbook, how to pay their bills, how to maximize their benefit. We're going to have case managers, for example, like let's say you have a single mother who's a nurse's aide making $19 an hour, and she's got 2 kids. Well, we could help her with, food purchasing ideas as far as WIC and food stamps and other ways to get food. Something else we're going to do in this example, as the services side of what we're providing, is if you look at studies, you have a mom and dad in the household and kids, and mom or dad are home and the kids get home from school and they're engaged with them on their studies. If you look at their FSA, and I'll call it FCAT scores, they're here and their GPAs are here. And if you look at children that come from single-family households or mom's having to work a job, maybe 2 jobs, and the kids get home from school, nobody's there, their assessment scores and grade point averages are here. Okay? We're going to have a team of people at this location. When the kids get out of school, they're not going to the apartment. They're going to the clubhouse. We're going to have people there to look online at their homework assignments to make sure that they get their homework assignments done and things that we can do to keep the family intact and also that the kids don't get involved in things they shouldn't. So these are all things that have to be included. And now we talk about the insights of a land use restriction agreement. These are all things that we're negotiating with the county, and Matt and his team have been extraordinarily gracious on this effect. They were looking at a template that they have for Allura, and when we looked at Florida Housing's Allura, it has made more sense for us to adopt the Florida Housing Allura into the agreement that we have with Sarasota County. Now, the land use restriction agreement we have with Florida Housing Finance Corporation is for 50 years, as we said. Okay, so for a minimum of 50 years, this development is intended for these purposes. Okay, and we're talking about people at 80, but predominantly 60% of AMI, and we have some of the units at 35% of AMI. And all this is spelled in the agreement. The nice thing about the tax credits is this. So you guys got a hold of money and you go to loan it or grant it to an organization like Blue Castle. Well, then you have to figure out how you're going to afford to monitor this for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. Well, the nice thing about having it financed through Florida Housing Finance Corporation is they basically do that piece for you. And they're experts at it, and they have a high level of scrutiny into these deals. And then basically you get provided with a report if it maintains full compliance or not. So that is very beneficial. What we love as developers is land. So when the property is available, in this particular case, the county's, the 6.2 acre site is a prime location. The challenge to this site is the land is owned by Sarasota County, but it is in the city of Sarasota. So on one hand, we're over here negotiating with Matt and his team on the LURA and the ARPA funding and the agreements for that piece of it. Concurrently, and Matilda Jarrett, who's here from Blue Sky Communities today, who's got some more stories that she can share with you after. Over here, we have to work on permitting. So it's a little bit of a juggling act, okay? But we still feel we are optimistic. As a matter of fact, June 21st, we're having a community workshop. So we are optimistic that we will be in permitting or have a permit by December, January is what we're praying for here. So because of the Blue Sky Castle relationship, it does provide a mechanism by which we can work with both the city and the county concurrently and address the various issues that are at play. Like I talked about with the 9% credits being extraordinarily competitive, typically a tax credit developer wins about 20% of the time. For some reason, our average is a little bit higher than that. So we're very thankful for that, actually a lot higher than that. The 9%, the reason they're so competitive, like I said, it's a minimal match compared to your 4% credits. Is everybody following me so long, or okay? The other thing is you have to be actively involved with your local government, which we are, but also your local community organizations and associations. You know, your developer has to do that to be a good neighbor, so people like Matt are not getting phone calls from screaming neighbors. And so when we develop, we look at the design, like for New Trail Plaza, we're actually building 4-story buildings along 41, the trail. But as we go back into the property, we're tapering down to 3-story buildings. And we have a buffer in the back of the property of 200 feet roughly. Do you remember? So as we get back into the neighborhood section, it tapers back. But the thing we're doing is the buildings are in the center of the property and not on the edge as it goes back to the property. So it provides some buffering and landscape buffering, so we're not infringing on the neighborhood. Now, we're going to keep about 1.5 acres vacant behind our development. It is our plan down the road to build 4 to 5 single-family homes back there, which will match into the neighborhood as well. But this all has to be done in concurrence, so you have to work, again, as Blue Castle, your neighborhood associations, Florida Housing Finance Corporation, the City of Sarasota, and Sarasota County. And then you have your architects, you have your engineers, and you have your lawyers. You have all these things in play here, which provides a lot of dedication to this. As we said here, we're purchasing the land from the county for $1.95 million. We would love for it to be free, but at the same time, $1.95 million for this land is a very good purchase, and we're extremely grateful for it. We put down $195,000. The county has been very gracious with us on the closing date, which is another challenge in our industry, and that's why county or city properties is great to get a hold of. Because in the tax credit world, we put a property under contract, and it could take a year and a half roughly, sometimes 2 years to close. And in this real estate market, how many property owners are willing to wait a year and a half, 2 years? Here's the other challenge. Being a tax credit developer, you have to site the property where it has access to shopping, has access to transportation, has access to jobs, healthcare, and all the amenities, education amenities of the community. So you have to be in better locations, which can create a little bit of a challenge as well. And with the timing, that's why this deal was so beautiful. Because again, the county has the ability and the luxury to be able to use time to our advantage to make all this happen. So, like I said, we're going to have 96 units, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. We're going to have management offices and a clubhouse there, minimally of 2,500 square feet. And the commercial space, this is something we did at our other site in Sarasota. We have a commercial space on the side of 3,000 square feet where we're going to have different community activities there, as well as helping to tutor children and to make sure that they keep their grade point averages up in school. And by doing that, we hope to see, less problems with kids in school. But also what's nice is, all of a sudden when these kids are juniors or seniors in high school, they're all of a sudden getting Bright Future scholarships and realizing they can do something with their lives as far as a higher education, where sometimes affordability makes it a barrier. It's going to have it's going to be a 3-story wood frame as we go back to the property. The face is going to be 4-story. It's going to have a recreation area and open space. And like I said, it's going to have a mix of 30, 60, and 80% of AMI. So 30% of AMI is roughly about $22,000 a year is the maximum income for those units. A majority of the units are going to be at 60% of AMI, which in Sarasota for a single individual is running about $32,000, $33,000 a year. For a family of 4, Matt, is roughly $40,000. So we're not talking a lot of money, so we have to keep the rents affordable. And to give an example, recently I went downtown acting like I was going to be a prospective tenant with some rental communities downtown. To rent a 700 square foot space in downtown Sarasota right now, the lowest I found was $2,250 a month, up to $2,700. And when I looked at these units, they're not any nicer than what we've developed. As a matter of fact, one of them had even cheaper cabinetry and countertops in them than ours. And the way this deal is so amazing is the ARPA money that was put into the deal, and Matt and his team and Steve, I don't think Steve Hyde is here, but from Sarasota County government, they really pushed for us to focus on the 30 and the 60% of AMI. And that's going to be a challenge as we talk about affordability. You're going to get developers that are going to say, yeah, we want to basically capitalize on the Live Local Act. That's fantastic. But 120% of AMI is not the answer. It really needs to have a mixture, quite frankly, of 30, 60, 80, and 120 to make it work. But the reality is the only way it's going to work with people at 80% of AMI or 60 or below is it's going to have tax credit financing. When I started in this career that I'm in, I was building for $75 a square foot. Those days are gone. So right now, to build something of any caliber, you're looking at $220, $250 a square foot. It just is what it is, okay? So if you look at those numbers, 700 square feet at $200,000, or $200 a square foot, you're $140,000 plus dollars at a minimum, more like $150,000 to $200,000 range. But for somebody who's making $33,000 a year and has a child, how do you charge enough rent to cover your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, a little something for the organization, but yet keep it affordable? That's why these tax credits are so crucial. They defray that cost of debt service on the property, which financially stabilizes. And the other reason you want that is you want to make sure there's plenty of cash in these deals, because what we need to do is maintain the properties. And the one reason I chose to do the joint ventures that I've done with Blue Sky Communities is for this reason. If you go look at their properties they built 10 years ago, they look like they were built 6 months ago. You don't want something that's a beautiful, shiny penny today, but in about 2 years it's tarnished. And that's crucial. So here's the site that we have. And as you see, the buildings go along 41. We have a beautiful retention pond that we're putting in. And then the buildings go up the center of the property to basically create buffering on both sides of us. And then there's a split where the driveway comes in, and to the south of it, we have another 4-story building where we're going to have the commercial space on the bottom floor and residential up on the upper floors. And that is the rendering of the building. We try to give our buildings substance, architectural pop. We don't want them looking like affordable. Here's the reason, okay? The building environment that people live in is a key indicator and contributor to the success of them. If you think about how we used to do affordable housing back in the 60s and 70s, we all knew those are the projects. Do you remember those days? You could point at them. Everybody knew where the projects were. They knew what they look like. Don't make it look affordable. If you're going to build it as if you're going to live in it. If you cannot say, I would live in there proudly and gladly, you don't do it. So we want to give people dignity and hope, and we've done this. And what's amazing is agency-wide, we're over 90% success rate with the people we're serving, which is, I was told, was unheard of. A lot of communities that do affordable housing are turning over 20, 30% of their units a year. We're not turning over 4% because we put all these things in place. It's a mixture, again, of this, and I think this is what Florida Housing really likes about us, is the social infrastructure tied in with the housing. This is Arbor Village, the one I talked about that we opened in March of 20. It still looks like that today. And this is right in downtown Sarasota. A cute little story I'll share with you. We have a guy that lives there that used to be chronically homeless, and he had a disability. He was arrested 32 times in a year, basically for charges on being homeless. And he has been Baker and Marchman acted as well that year 15 times. He's been with us now going on 3.5 years. He works at a sandwich shop downtown where the owner himself had him arrested 5 times in 2019. Since 2020 of March when he moved in, he has not been rearrested once. He has not been gone to back any hospital, any jail, nothing. And he works in the community. That's the amazing part of this whole development. And that's really what this is all about, is a mixture of the partnerships. Guys, thank you very much, and we'll open it for questions.
So I'm glad they built that affordable housing unit in Sarasota, but I wish Publix would have stayed on that property, as that was a historic shopping center, and plus the tile mural too. And you would have the affordable housing in place of some of the parking lot. And, it would have been better that way. Well, you have shopping right next to residences. I'm an urban planning student.
Okay, no worries. Well, I can share with you, we're also working with another group. We had bid on another property in Sarasota County, that the 114-acre site, and it went to another group, and quite frankly, rightly so. They had a stronger proposal. Okay, I think Matt, in the commission made a good decision. Our concept was spot on, but their scope, I think, made it more formidable, okay? Except for one thing. We had a weakness on doing market rate housing, which is a bulk of it, and they have a strength of market rate housing. They have a massive weakness in affordable, and we're very strong. But we looked at the site, and we looked at building a grocery store and a pharmacy and even a federally qualified health center to be on site. And amazingly enough, the group did recircle back with us saying we won the bid, but this is something the county did. The county said we want 25% of the units to be affordable, which in this case is roughly 370. So this is where the county stepped up, and I thought it was a brilliant move, and quite frankly, it was a just move. So on the site, we're going to have the grocery store and pharmacy and the other amenities. Now, regarding our other developments, they're within walking or bicycling distance of a grocery store.
Yeah. Also, how were you able to stop Walmart from building a super center there? This was a big victory for affordable housing, because, well, I've heard it in the newspaper.
Well, for the sites that we're referencing earlier, both the 4644 North Tamiami Trail as well as the other two other sites in Sarasota County has surplus lands dedicated for affordable housing, they all come with contracts. So inside those contracts, we have very clear specifications that it shall be for affordable housing. And for the other one that was referenced by Scott a moment ago, actually has a requirement to build a grocery and a pharmacy, and the size of those would not work at all for what you're referencing. So the contracts are pretty
Oh,
sound.
I
Take care of
wasn't
that.
talking about that. I was talking about, they originally wanted to build a sprawling Walmart, which would have been worse for the community had the affordable housing.
I don't know anything about that, I'm
Don't
sorry.
know anything about that.
Oh, I might be talking about the wrong property. It looked like it was the site of the old Publix, huh?
No,
Oh, sorry for,
no worries. Yes, ma'am?
Great concept, great job. Does the Sarasota County do anything with their surplus property, like maybe you got escheated, like just single properties? Do you donate them to any not-for-profits, or how do you handle them for maybe affordable housing?
Yes, we actually have a system every single year where we take a look at every single one of our county lands and make sure that they still are in our category that we want to retain, or is it something that we want to obviously surplus? In the middle of that are the escheated lots. They come, right, sporadically through time. A little while back, we actually had a healthy dose of many escheated lots that were in our City of Northport community, and all of those went up for a no minimum bid sale process. No minimum bid during that process, and we actually, Jonathan's in the back, he's probably going to kill me if I give him the wrong number out, but a sizable amount of proceeds went to affordable housing because of that effort. And we now have a policy. How much was it? 450,000. And all of those dollars actually then go into our Housing and Community Development Fund, which can be used for everything from direct construction cost or actually impact fee mitigation payments and so forth. At this point in time, we only have a handful, right, because only one or two come in per year kind of thing. But that's how we deal with it.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. I had a question on the parcel. It's a pretty significant land use change and zoning change. And you talked about working with the neighborhood associations and having community meetings, and you said that your commission was very supportive of the change. Were there people that were outspoken at your meetings that talked about changing from a park in their backyard to having affordable housing?
Initially, they were. So we attended meetings and we showed people renders of what we're developing. And what was amazing is actually the positive response we got. And I know what you're referencing with NIMBY, and I've been there and done that. But in this case, we haven't experienced it because people are recognizing. And the other thing is the neighbors, and I really got to applaud the neighbors for this. A lot of developers could manipulate what's affordable housing. Building units 120% of AMI is not going to solve the problem. That's not going to help your LPN at the hospital or your newly hired sheriff's deputy or police officer or school teacher. Your 80 and 60% units are going to do that. And when the neighborhoods found out that we were doing it, they felt better because of our reputation. But also the fact that we're going to be concentrated on 60% of AMI, we got a warm reception.
And zoning-wise, I don't believe you had to go through the rezoning process
No.
at the city. So that's a very big factor, is that it already had the zoning in place to be able to accommodate this use.
Now, here's something else. Affordable housing is priority, so the city makes it more conducive to work with us, but the county's involvement carries a lot of weight with it as well. So that can help us get through the process. Yes?
Thank you. Do you have any successful examples of the affordable piece as it relates to homeownership beyond Habitat maybe?
Yeah, Habitat's obviously been very successful in our community. The third surplus lands in Sarasota County that we're in negotiations with right now is with an organization called Community Housing Trust, the CHT for Sarasota County. We haven't completed that contract, but they do have that home ownership model where they build in equity, and then once they're able to leave, they're able to take some of that equity with them, but the house still remains perpetually affordable. So at a future session, I'd love to be able to share the outcome of that. Not there. Hopefully, we can get that contract to the board later this fall. Thank you for bringing that up, though. It is a different model, yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is, what was the 50-year affordability period based on? And then the second is, and I may have missed this, does the county still own the land, or did you transfer it?
Well, in reverse order, the county still owns the land. So we want to make sure that all the provisions are in place for them to have a successful project, and then we'll close right then and there. We're not that far away, actually.
No, we're not. One of the challenges with Florida Housing Finance Corporation, we will not have the funding for closing until we get our permit-ready letter. So, there might be a chance that, we'll have to work with the county to extend it a few months. But again, working with a municipality to do that makes it a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, for the 50 years, when was it, how does that calculated?
So the 50-year LoRa, and let me tell you, we can reset the clock. Let's say we get to year 20 and we need to do major upgrades and there's another grant cycle, Florida Housing, and we use their money to upgrade the properties in 20 years, it resets the clock. Okay, but the 50 years, so for 50 years, Florida Housing will contract with a group to come out and monitor us annually, and they basically do HQS inspections to make sure the units are up to snuff. Now, here's another great thing that I didn't mention. Blue Sky Communities has an affiliate called Carteret Management. Carteret's been around since 1970 doing property management. And in the early 80s, when they started getting the tax credit deals, they have been managing them to this day, and they've maintained full compliance. So Carteret is a top-notch group, which is very helpful in that regard. And we've been monitored now 3 times on our site in Sarasota that's currently in operation, and we've maintained full compliance. And they really dive into your documentation, what's called a tenant income certification, and they look at the financial records with heavy scrutiny to make sure that you're doing what you say you're doing. Promise has to equal performance at 100%.
Yeah, that timeline for the county's position was a very important factor, right? We have a lot of developments that come forward and put forward 10-year horizons, 20-year horizons. Now, it just happened to be that the 50 years is what was going to happen through the deal, but that's a substantial commitment to affordable housing, and that was very helpful in our understanding which proposal was going to have the most value to that community.
And I can also share this with our side of it. Over the past 24 years, I've bought 125 properties. I've sold 2. I sold a house to buy a 10-unit apartment building, and I sold a house to help build a 42-unit one. But the people moved to those other places. So we also have the track record. We buy, we don't sell because the need is just that great. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah, I think that you may have answered most of my initial question, but let me give you some context. A small city where I live, in the county I live, they just had an election, and 2 very well-established commissioners were turned over simply because of the half-unit issue. And there's a fear in the public of the density that adds to it with no, parking regulations, et cetera. So pieces of the toolbox have been removed in this particular area. So I think this is a great business case where we'd be able to simply offer some success stories where, potentially this doesn't happen in the future. So with that context, do you have simplified metrics that you're tracking other than your percentage to AMI that you can then use to show, say, elected officials, policymakers, that it works?
Yes, we do, and it's still evolving at the same time. So the very first one of those HTUs is literally on construction right now, and our planning staff are formulating that kind of matrix, if you will, of how many units, are they 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, what's the occupancy rate, how fast do they get occupied. The AMI piece, of course, is going to be a big piece of it, the rental rates and so forth. So we are tracking as much as we're ability to track. For instance, one of the things we're most curious about is the vehicle use, right? Here we are reducing the parking requirements, but what's actually going to happen through time, that's something we're very interested in, particularly as if you do an HDU development, should we be adjusting any of the transportation models, right? And that's, so from our engineering standpoint, I don't think we have that answer right now. It's assuming that it's going to have less vehicles because we're having less parking, but we don't know that for sure yet. So I think my guess is within 3 to 5 years, we'll have some healthy data around it. And in the meantime, unfortunately, there's going to be some folks that have a lot of opinions about whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, like I said, it's a good business case, and everybody can watch it for success. Yeah.
It's certainly helping with the diversification of the housing market. That is for sure.
Now, what we did in Fort Myers, for example, is I pushed for more green space versus hard space, but we had to reduce the parking per code. And so we showed them from other developments we did it wasn't needed. And what we agreed to is at 6 months, 12 months, 18 and 24 months, we would look at the situation with the city to determine if we underdeveloped for parking. And if we did, we would convert green space into parking space and resolve the issue ourselves. Again, it's about being a good partner with your municipality. It has to happen.
Yeah, Mark?
Great presentation. It really helps to shed some light on how complicated the process is, and it's not necessarily something that can happen quickly if it's going to be successful. So really insightful. Can you talked a little bit about Live Local and some of the challenges with it. Can you talk a little bit more about, from your perspective, maybe the benefits and the challenges in Sarasota County, and whether you've seen some movement yet on that?
So for all, thank you for asking that question. It is very timely. Everything we just presented today, of course, is pre-Live Local, right? So it's a different world. All those things were political will to do affordable housing. Senate Bill 102, which is the Live Local Act, kind of does the opposite. It simply says, here, we're going to streamline the process for you, and we're going to set that criteria for you, and oh, by the way, we're just going to make it administrative as well. So for those who are unfamiliar, when you're doing a development, it's up to 40% of the units have to be affordable, but of course they do define that as up to 120%. So it could be at an 80%, but it doesn't require that. As it does have a 30-year time horizon, so that's a pretty decent, as far as, LURA kind of requirement. But the biggest probably pieces that people are probably paying attention to, number one is the density. So it allows for the density to be done without a rezone administratively based on the highest density of residential that you already have in that particular area, as well as the height. Anything within 1 mile, you can already go to that height. So it seems like it's got a lot of flexibility built onto it, and it seems like it could be very successful. We have not had anybody come to the door just yet. We've heard some rumblings about it. I think we're wanting to see, of course, what comes through the door. We're going to be very much encouraging a pre-application process. Since this is a fast track through to straight to site development, we want to make sure we have the opportunity to sit down and walk through what are those things that we might be missing. We don't want something crammed down anybody's throat. I think Scott said it best, right? We want to have a model, a product here that when it's built, you couldn't even tell that it's a, quote, affordable housing development project. We wouldn't want this to turn into that, just because you don't have to go through a rezone process right now. I think there's a lot of details. We're encouraging people to come in the door about it, and we're in the heavy monitoring mode with Live Local Act right now. I assume you haven't had anybody come yet through your doors either, but
No, we're
I'm sure we'll call each other when it happens.
I think what you guys are going to experience is a tidal wave probably in 3 to 6 months, because we've had a number of developers contact us, and our position is, we can do it, but we want to utilize tax credit funding, and we want to weave in 80 and 60 and some 35%ers. If you're truly going to be honest about what you're doing, show some integrity, and really dive into affordable. 120%, that's scratching a little bit, but that's not really diving in and really get into the meat of it. You have to get into this 80 and 60%ers. The other thing about the Live Local Act is there's some unfunded mandates in it. So they develop these units, and they got to be for 30 years. Who's going to regulate it? It's going to be on the city or the county. Well, how are they going to do that? It's going to be your OHCD office? Do you have the team to do it? See, in our example, when we use credits, it ties the whole development into the deal, and you have Florida Housing that funding that whole policy and monitoring.
Very true. Yeah, great. We preliminary discussions internally is, it could be a really great thing in the right area. It'll be a total nightmare in the wrong area. So
I fully agree.
See how that pans out.
Yeah, it's going to bring a whole new level to the NIMBYism concept if it's the nightmare part. Right, because then that won't be at a public hearing with a required neighborhood workshop. That's going to be an administrative item, and obviously that's a big change for most communities in Florida. Yeah.
But to your point, Scott, if they can actually weave in some real affordability, then at least there's something to tell the public a benefit here besides just taking away the right for having the process.
Correct. And the people that I met with yesterday, I told them we would love to entertain it, but these are some criteria that we have. And we don't want to build out to maximum density because again, you have to be a good neighbor and you have to be good to people around you. The concern I have with Live Local is this: you're going to possibly have some developers like us that are a little bit more aggressive with it and really just maximize the heck out of it. And then it's not going to fit in, and it's going to have problems, and it's not going to have longevity as a result. It's got to have those key components in it.
Any other questions? Any closing remarks?
Scott, want to go first?
No, I want to thank everybody for being here, and I also want to thank the leadership at Sarasota County. I think it's highly commendable what they've done with their ARPA funds, for example. It's created about 700 new affordable units is what's going to total. While they were the second largest in the state for how much money they put of ARPA money into it, if you look at per capita by the size of the county, they're actually number one. So we like this innovative thinking that the county has exercised, and they have great leadership, and I'm very thankful for that and the opportunity for that and to speak with y'all today.
Yeah, I want to echo that just real quick. I think from my perspective today, the one thing I wanted to share in front of a bunch of professionals that already know most of the issues that we're talking about is just really underscoring the point of having not just the standard toolbox, but thinking creatively with others, really adapting to the times, whether it be, failed ITN processes, because if you keep at it, we found a successful partnership. And then, of course, keep adapting as new state laws come forward. And again, thinking out of the toolbox is probably the best bet to actually put a dent in the affordable housing across the state of Florida. And with that, it was a great privilege to present with you today, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
What else, Mark?
That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, please give a round of applause for our presenters.